Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining the IJB today. So as you're aware, the meeting on the 9th last week was adjourned, and you've all now received the correct mental health draft strategy document, which today's reconvened IJB is here to discuss, and that's item 4 on the agenda. Can I just ask if there's any apologies, Fiona?
Yes, there's apologies, Chair, from Graham Martin, Chris Boyle, Richard Humble, Andrew Jack, Catherine Lindsay, Gary Malone, Craig Sinclair, George Bowie, Jane Mugg, and Sally Wilson.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for that. So some time has been taken to consider the recommendations being put forward to the IJB, and these have been changed slightly. And what I'm going to do, these recommendations, I'm going to read them out. So if you're all right, just to listen to me for a minute, I think it's important that we get them right. So our recommendations are, firstly, to acknowledge the considerable work that's been undertaken so far to develop the draft strategy. Secondly, to approve the direction of travel outlined within the draft strategy. Thirdly, to acknowledge that the production of a Tayside mental health and wellbeing strategy will meet one of the main recommendations arising from the independent inquiry into mental health services in Tayside, entitled Trust and Respect. Fourthly, to instruct the Chief Officer to submit to a future IJB a comprehensive report on the co-production, involvement, engagement, and communication with users of services, staff, and the wider public that has taken place in the development of the strategy and the outcome of these activities. And finally, to instruct the Chief Officer to submit to a future IJB meeting for consideration and approval a detailed implementation and delivery plan with accompanying sustainable financial framework, which will update the current funding the strategy section of the strategy document. So forgive the length of those recommendations and me reading them out, but I think it's important that everybody's comfortable with these recommendations. So I'm going to open it now for any comments or questions. So if you want to either raise your hand actually or virtually, I sometimes don't see whenever hands are raised. So does anybody have any questions or comments? So I see Sandy and Peter and Kate. So we'll take Sandy first.
Thank you, Chair. I think partly to Kate, but also I guess almost a question for myself. The last recommendation you've mentioned there, Emma Jane, was about, sorry, Chair, was about the financial framework to be associated with the strategy. And certainly in the recommendation you just read out, it talks about bringing it back to a future IJB meeting. I think in my head, I'm thinking that would be our February IJB meeting, which is our next meeting. That's obviously quite a challenging thing to do in terms of developing a financial strategy for that meeting, but I think it's what we should all be aspiring to do. So hopefully, Kate, I know when you spoke last time, last week, you did kind of recognise there's work to be done on that. I've had kind of brief chats with 1 or 2 people in the Finance Network, and we acknowledge that. But I think I would be hoping that something that people feel comfortable with. It may not do everything everybody wants it to do, but something that people feel comfortable with to describe kind of where we are, the resources available, maybe some kind of semblance of how things may change in the future. I think that's what I'd be hoping to be able to see come back to the February IJB in terms of a financial plan. So hopefully that feels okay for Kate, and hopefully for that bit of it, depending on other things, we can adopt that February target into the recommendation.
Thanks for that, Sandy. I'll bring in Kate just now, if that's okay, because I know part of that was directed to Kate.
Yeah, I mean, if I could cover both points, Emma, that I was going to make. Thank you so much for those recommendations. I agree with the recommendations. I think that that's within the purpose of the meeting in terms of our final draft strategy. If there is an approval in terms of the direction of travel, with those caveats that in terms of your recommendation for the Chief Officer, I'll just give Gail a heads up that she doesn't have to do that alone. In terms of the communication and engagement process that we've gone through, I have asked the programme team to put together a thematic analysis. On top of that, what will look like a communications and engagement report. that will, you know, go through everything that we've done since March to engage as widely as we have. I think some of the work has been exemplar, and I would want to put it on record, you know, in terms of sharing that with people. So recommendation 4 is something that we could do together. Recommendation 5, I'm in agreement that the 4 chief officers, the 4 chief finance officers have agreed to work together. And this is where I guess in terms of what we can bring together in February will be relative to the effort that we can put into it to describe the financial framework, you know, for the delivery of the mental health and wellbeing strategy. We will have delivery plans at that time in terms of the 6 projects, because I'm expecting them by the end of December. So that will be laid out in terms of, you know, what the aims, objectives, and what's included in those 6 projects and the various work streams. So I'm confident to say that we'll have that. Whether we can prioritise and cost all of that by February is the challenge. So I'll say that here and now, it would be our aspiration absolutely to do that. And I think we need to build into that, you know, an iterative, you know, reporting process back to the IGIBs, not just to this one, but to the others, in terms of the ongoing prioritisation, whether that's a biannual thing or whether it's an annual thing to look at the financial frameworks, you know, for each year of the strategy. So I don't think we'll be able to cost all of the strategy for a 3-year, but we may be able to do it in a staggered way for year on year, Emma.
Thanks very much for that, Kate. Peter, did you want to come in as well?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. First thing, I would like to acknowledge the vast amount of work that's gone into this document. It's huge, which gives me a concern. And in fact, although there is an acknowledgement that everybody thought it was too big, it's now gone from 99 pages to 109 pages. So it's going in the wrong direction. And I'm wondering whether it's possible for 2 things, if not more. The first is it possible to put at the very front what the strategy is? Just a page, a paragraph, a sentence, whatever. Something like, you know, everybody with mental health issues will be seen by a practitioner within 12 weeks and we'll reduce the rate of suicide by 5% per year. Something or along those lines, of whatever we can do. The other thing is I'm wondering if large amounts of this document could be taken out and put as an appendices. And I'll just run through the list. I see you've got a pen and pencil there, Kate. Where are we? Page 25 to page 28, a background. Section 7 is background. Page 32 is background. There's no strategy there. And so on. There are huge pieces of work which have been done and which are demonstrated. I think they should be put somewhere else as an addendum, because my fear is that I'm not quite sure who the audience is, but any audience. I mean, I read it. I suspect we all read it over the weekend as if you like a matter of duty, because we were asked to. I think it arriving on a practitioner's desk or even a service user's desk, they might go, no, I haven't got time to read this. You know, why can't they tell me what they're doing and tell me soon, quickly? So that's my main comment. And the real thing is the lack of strategic documentation. I know this is a work in progress, but and I agree with the work, the direction of travel, but I would like to see by now some sort of a statement, declarative statements with timescales and achievements. In fact, you do get to one point, on page 69, you say we'll know we've made a difference in the various areas when, and there's a list of things. I thought that would be a good place to put timescales, yeah, okay. and numbers if we can put numbers. So that's my comment. If we can cut this down to 30 pages with a 60-page appendix, that would be fine for me.
Peter, yes, thank you very much for your comments. I guess the final production of the strategy, you know, in terms of, it's been a difficult one in terms of the number of contributions that people have wanted to make. So therefore, in the final production of the strategy, what we have talked about is actually breaking this down into 4 different sections and potentially 4 different documents. You know, so therefore, we do have a creative comms director that we are funding jointly with the Scottish Government. They are currently looking at this. I hate to say this, Peter, but it was 161 pages long. So we have reduced it almost by a third in terms of, you know, trying to bring it down So the final production of this, again, the challenge is how much of this can we summarise? How much of this can we put into, you know, language that is easily or better understood? I guess the 100-page document is that this is the direction of travel for all of the aspects of mental health and wellbeing in Tayside. And I guess that's what we've tried to capture in this, that will remain, you know, part of the journey for the development of a mental health and wellbeing strategy in Tayside. And Peter talks about who the audience is. Again, it's difficult because we've got a whole system approach here. That we've got formal audiences in the, you know, alcohol drug partnerships. We've got the NHS board. We've got, you know, the Dundee Commission, you know, in terms of some of those people. But we've also got service user groups. So putting together what we've called an easy read, putting together what we're calling a summary document, which will be no more than 20 pages long, Peter, so maybe we'll send that directly to you. That summary document, I think, when we think even about how many of these are we going to print, you know, we're going to print more of the summary than we will of the overall, you know, full document. They will also be available electronically. And we've had some thoughts about, should we do an audio version, you know, something that people can put their earpods in and listen to. And the electronic version, in as much as, you know, around diversity, is what do people want to read? So if you go to the contents page, you will be able to click on, if I want to read about medicines and mental health, I can go directly to that page and that page only. So I don't need to, you know, electronically do that. What we also got was feedback from the strategy writers group to say, could we produce, you know, like briefing papers? If somebody only wants to know about, you know, mental health inpatient services, that's 4 pages. So we're taking that on board in terms of, we've got a website, we'll start to look at some of this in terms of the final production, and potentially you could see, you know, 10 briefing papers, which is maybe the idea of all these appendices. And people then only see what is a 40-page strategy cut down into a 20-page summary. So thank you for that. It reinforces what we've heard, and we would absolutely want to take some of that forward in terms of the final production of this.
That's good. Thanks for that.
Excellent. Peter. I think that's very useful narrative, Kate. Elaine, I saw your hand up.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. I think it's just reflecting on that, and I think probably we do, when I looked at the document, I think the executive summary is really helpful. It sets the scene, but I'm always going to want much more detail about the bits that I feel I've got an action to do. So I'm always going to look at great detail in the workforce, and I think having that depth of information that's accessible, I think it has to be there. I entirely appreciate that reading a 160-page document will put many people off, but I think I really get a sense that the engagement team have looked at how best to get this to people, and it really has thought very widely. But I think there are bits that people who will, if we didn't have the detail there, we would have been found wanting. So I think the ability to have an overview, and I think the electronic format will really help with that. And then you can look to the bits that are relevant. I want to know about the drug and alcohol strategy. I want to know about workforce and the other areas. And I think if it had been a very superficial overview, it would have probably fallen short. I'd always be damned for having too much information available than too little. And I think the time frame bit's the other point I wanted to speak about is being the problem is often when you publish these things with time frames, they're immediately dated and out of date. By the time it takes to come through all the formative committees it has to go through, and I think also it's being probably realistic about the fact that COVID is going to put a different spin on what we have to do going forward. And I would just wonder if perhaps putting a formal timescale would have potentially be dated it and made it look a bit less relevant. I'd really appreciate if other folk had a view on that, but I think it was trying not to be out of date from the moment it came through.
Can I just say one word? I wasn't suggesting that we actually ditch or dispose of all that information, Elaine. I was thinking we could have it in, as I think Kate suggested, more digestible chunks for those people who want to look at special areas, but a general overview with the strategy for someone like a service user who may be touching a lot of points in the whole strategy.
Okay. Julie, did I see, Councillor Bell, did I see your hand go up? Yep, thanks.
Thanks very much. The blue one was up as well, but
I can't see those for some reason, so please do wave at me.
I will do. Thank you. Yeah, I think the recommendations as they stand today are ones that I could support in light of the final document, if you like. And I'm heartened to hear what Kate's saying about a report around the co-production and engagement. So for me, what didn't come across last week was that co-production for me starts with a blank sheet of paper and with the citizen voice right from the outset. And I'm not sure that came across last week, and it may be just part of the general confusion that we were
No, absolutely. I accept that. Didn't come across last week. You're right.
So I look forward to seeing that, Kate. And I also agree with both Sandy and Peter around, for me, the biggest things are, well, this is where we are just now, but this is where we want to get to, and this is how we're going to do it. And this is how we'll measure the impact of that, because the people of Tayside, and speaking for the people of Angus, in a very broad way, I think we deserve to see the kind of service that we deserve being delivered when we need it, and how we can make sure that it is working well. And that was the area that I would like to see more of. And I fully appreciate that this is going to be a work in progress as well. It'll evolve as time goes on, and we'll probably get regular updates around how the Angus Mental Health and Wellbeing Group is working on our more localised service delivery. So that's important for me, because I do want that level of comfort. And also I think it's important that the governance and the IGBs are properly reflected in this document, and also the TSIs across the piece as well. I think we can't deliver a whole system approach to mental health and wellbeing without the TSIs, and I think that the bit that has been allocated to them probably doesn't do them a full service. And I fully appreciate decisions have been made around cutting, what stays in, what stays out, but they're absolutely critical to recovery, to service delivery, and to engaging with people in their communities. So I would really like to see a little bit more of that as time goes on as well. So yeah, broadly, I can support those recommendations as they sit today and the direction of travel. And I do appreciate the challenge of the timescale for the February IJB, but again, having some sort of financial framework is critical to that in terms of our own governance. So thanks for taking that on board.
No, you're welcome. And I guess with the appointment of a senior finance officer for mental health, we now have that dedicated resource that can work with the chief finance officers for each of the IJBs. So Sandy and Karen and the others from the other areas, I have given a clear steer to my chief finance officer that what the expectation is to describe how mental health services are funded across Tayside. We have an £80 million budget for mental health in Tayside, and some of that is devolved, some of it is in retained services within the acute board. And through Trust and Respect, we are charged with responsibility to consolidate those services, to join those services up as much as we possibly can in service of the citizens of Angus, Perth and Kinross and Dundee. And just to come back, Councillor Bell, I think there's probably a PowerPoint presentation that would be useful if Gail or Bill could give the IJB access to, that gives quite a clear indication of all of the co-production and co-creation that we've done, over the past 9 months. And something I'd spoken to Gail about that we're doing in Dundee is a briefing to the councillors. And I'm doing that tomorrow night to the Dundee councillors. So again, that's something that maybe we can offer to do in early January with the councillors across Angus, if that's welcome.
Could I add in another question before we move on, please, if that's okay? I know that Dr. Strang had there was a possibility of him being used as a critical friend. Have you taken him up on that?
Yeah, I meet with David every 6 weeks, and we go through all of the recommendations, and just to get a clarity on, it's been really helpful to go back to him to say, what did you actually mean by this recommendation? So if I go back to the 28th of May this year, when we did the final presentation, when we opened up, one of our board meetings to a wider group of stakeholders, and we presented at that, it's exactly what you said, Councillor Bell, is that we started with service users, we started with staff. We did start with a blank sheet of paper, despite the fact that, I've maybe done this elsewhere in other territorial boards in Scotland. I had to say that it had to be tailored to the needs of Tayside. So we have a strategic planning framework in the same way as you will through your SPG. But I think we can point back to where we want to make a difference for people. And sometimes, our staff in some organisations have to compromise with that. So key to this is what will be a difference, the so what question, what will be different for people?
Gail, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Kate, just prior to the meeting, I was just discussing with the Chair actually that perhaps in hindsight, we should have also requested a development session as well. I think that would have alleviated and avoided a lot of the questions for you today. So apologies, we've probably not done that. My other question though was in relation to IGBs in respect of community mental health services, and we felt that perhaps IGBs weren't included in the collective leadership promise, yet the majority of services and resources covered by the strategy are delegated in law to the IGB. So there was perhaps a bit of work that we thought we could maybe strengthen there, Kate. That was my other issue.
Yeah, and I think, Gail, that as I've said, other of these types of meetings is that it's still in final draft form, so you can still influence that. So if there is, a paragraph that you would like to provide that we can put into the final production of the document, if Peter doesn't mind us, increasing it by half a page, we'll take the half page out somewhere else. I think you're right. It's important, that we put something in, and if maybe the 3 chief officers could agree a form of words, I'd be really happy to do that. And as I've said, in terms of true co-creation, if the contribution comes forward, it will absolutely go into the document. So it's back to what Elaine is saying, where some of these requests have been made from advocacy services, and maybe we've got a full page for the police, and we've got a full page for human rights, and we've got a full page for advocacy services. So equitably, we should be giving sufficient space for the role of IGBs in relation to mental health. So thank you for that, Gail. I really appreciate if we could talk about when we can receive that so that it can go into the final production.
Do we have any further comments or questions? I see Hayley and I see Councillor Spade. So we'll take Hayley first.
Thanks, Chair. It was really just to cover on something that we discussed last week, Kate, around the third sector involvement. And I think Julie, Councillor Bellsworthy, had just brought it up there too in regards to the TSI. And that's a really, really strong point. But actually, if we look at the wider third sector and the wider community groups that are available in Angus, I think we would be doing a disservice if we weren't actually capturing that properly. And I know that we've submitted third sector response to you, but even if it's not, as we said before in the strategy, I would really not want that to be lost. And I think we need to look at different ways moving forward whereby we can invite specific third sector organisations who are better suited to contribute to the mental health and wellbeing strategy, or even the delivery of it.
I think you're absolutely right in terms of the delivery of it, Hayley. But as I've just said to Gail, if the TSI section you're not comfortable with, then you need to come back to me to say there's a sentence or two that would recognise the comprehensive contribution that third sector organisations make to mental health. Even just contextualising that, I'm happy for you to come back to me on that. Again, that's what this kind of co-production process is about. But as I'd said to you, the communication and engagement report will take on board all of that feedback in order that we can take that into the delivery plans. So the 6 projects, the 31 work streams, absolutely, should have representation from third sector organisations and for people working in communities and localities.
Absolutely, that's helpful. I had originally submitted a larger document in regards to our TSI, but I appreciate you had to fit all 3 of them on the one page.
Yes.
I think more specifically, I think I could be a bit more specific and send something over to you, because ours is really just highlighting social prescribing. But I think we look at the overall view of what we can bring. So I'll get something over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Speed.
Yeah, thanks, Emma-Jane. Yeah, thank you, Kate, and to everyone who's been involved in preparing and putting together the strategy, which we know is crucial in setting out a clear and improved pathway for the future provision of mental health services within Tayside and Angus. I know it's been said a few times already in the meeting and it's picked up within the strategy, but just coming back to Peter's points around the amount of information that's in it. I appreciate that it's going out to a wide audience, and there is crucial bits of information that needs to be within it. However, it would be good to see that kind of broken down, and also perhaps links, like was suggested, to kind of more in-depth bits of information. Because I think for me, what is really important, and I'm sure I do speak on behalf of people who access services, is that we all want clear, simple, easy to access services at the right time, especially during crisis, and most importantly, effective support that helps people achieve better mental health and wellbeing outcomes and full recovery. So I think for all of us, we want to be able to pick up that strategy and be able to look at it and know what it's saying without having to go through hundreds of thousands of words. Like I say, that lots of those words and lots of that information will be critical, but it should be something that I think we can all pick up and very clearly see what it is that it's telling us, and I just still don't sense that when I pick it up. So I would hope that will be taken into consideration, Kate.
I think the paragraph that you've just articulated, and to take on board Peter's point of view, if we had that mission statement as the first thing that people read, then that will give people an absolute clarity and heads up as to however long you want to read into the document, this is what the document is saying and this is what the document's about. Because you're right, we could have written it in one paragraph. It's about getting to the right place first time. There's 3 or 4 words, and that's the strategy for mental health. But people have wanted to talk about inequalities, they've wanted to talk about unpaid carers, they wanted to talk about, so I absolutely hear what you're saying. And our task is to say, how can we get this into digestible, pieces of information for people to take on board? And what I'm trying to say to people is if it sits electronically, then that can all be split up. The real challenge is how we get it to people who don't have access to those who are, digitally excluded, those people who. So what I've said to the team in terms of communications and engagement is we need to look to do newsletters. We need to do, iterative communications to people to say, what is mental health going to do for unpaid carers? What are we going to do for, people with a learning disability, etc., etc. So yes, it's a difficult one in terms of how we get it down into digestible pieces. But I hope we've satisfied, satiated a lot of people by saying that we've listened to all of the contributions that we've received.
Yeah, and I think that continued kind of listening to people's journeys, with lived experiences is going to be crucial, so that we actually can check in to ensure that we are making good progress, and like you say, making sure that it is in a format that's not just digital, and if people aren't feeling that they're receiving a good service, it should be something that they can refer to and very easily say, well, this is what it says in the strategy, but this is not how I feel it's going. I mean, hopefully that's not the case, because we do want to be restoring public trust and confidence, and I'm sure that we will do that. And I think ongoing scrutiny is going to be really important, just so that we do exactly what it is that we're setting out to do. Thank you.
No, thank you for that.
Do we have any other comments or questions? I'm looking, but I can't see anybody. No. Okay. So on that basis, the five recommendations that I read out in the start, are we all happy to agree those recommendations? I'm seeing that as a yes.
So with Sandy's request for the timescale of February meeting added in.
With the request for the February meeting added into the finance recommendation. Are we happy to approve those recommendations?
Yep.
Okay. That's great. Thank you very much, everybody. So that was the only agenda item that we needed to cover today. So thank you very much, everybody. And happy Christmas to everyone as well, because this will be our last IJB meeting before the end of the year. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for that.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Merry Christmas.